Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. They slip between cracks in time, festering in the forgotten arteries of the Imperium, where light dies and history decays. They are never seen clearly, never remembered rightly. Their presence is not so much detected as endured, like the slow rot of a wound no one recalls receiving. When the Hrud pass through a world, clocks unwind. Flesh ages in minutes or regresses to dust. Buildings crumble under the weight of their own history, as if they remember being ruins before they were built. To behold them is to doubt the reality of your own memories. To fight them is to strike at shadow and sorrow. And yet they are real. Real in the same way entropy is real, in the same way a scream in a dream is real. Every Imperium world with flickering lights and hallucinating tech priests might whisper of them, though few name them. The Mechanicusts theorize. The Inquisition burns records. The Eldar weep and call them time eaters. The Hrud themselves remain silent, and behind that silence waits something worse than malice, the slow, consuming collapse of everything we know as linear. This is no enemy one can outfight or outthink. This is a presence that unmakes understanding itself. And in the wake of the Hrud, time does not just pass, it dies. To speak of the origin of the Hrud is to open a door not into history, but into fevered speculation and the half-lucid whispers of those driven mad by forbidden lore. No coherent chronicle exists, no racial memory inscribed in gene lore or sacred archives. Their past is a smoke-choked abyss into which even the most learned xenoscholars dare only briefly glance. But within that murk there are hints, jagged puzzle pieces that suggest the Hrud are older than most empires, perhaps even older than the concept of empire itself. Some claim they are the remnants of a race that once rivaled the old ones, the unfathomable architects of life across the stars. Others murmur darker things, that the Hrud were never made, but became, birthed from the detritus of a galaxy gone mad. During the War in Heaven, when the Necrontire and the Old Ones tore the stars asunder with godlike fury, there were casualties not just in flesh, but in the very fabric of time and space. What if, some whisper, the Hrud are the ghosts of that cataclysm, not souls of the dead, but the idea of loss itself given form? Their bodies are cloaked and twisted, difficult to fix in perception. They are described in conflicting terms even within the same report. Hunched and elongated, rag-wrapped and insectile, decaying yet eternal. It's as though their biology is a casualty of time itself, still unraveling from a trauma millions of years old. One theory, rarely voiced aloud, proposes that the Hrud did not evolve in the normal sense at all. That they are a failed containment experiment, entropy incarnate, bottled up by the Old Ones and released only when their empire collapsed. If true, it would explain much. Their toxic presence, their temporal instability, their absolute disinterest in conquest or diplomacy. Like a broken loop in a corrupted data stream, they recur only to erode and collapse what they touch. Some inquisitors speculate they may be drawn instinctively to places of decay, not because they cause it, but because they are it. Sentient collapse, a race of walking ruin. And yet, despite all this decay, the Hrud endure not in flourishing civilizations or star-spanning fleets, but in infestations. They burrow into the bowels of hive cities and the carcasses of space hulks, shunning light and order. They scuttle through shadow and make kinships with rot and rust. And in this persistence there lies the cruelest paradox. For a race so aligned with entropy, they do not end. They multiply. They migrate. They fester. It is as if the universe itself cannot cleanse them, cannot forget them, no matter how hard it tries. They are the aftertaste of a truth too hideous to speak aloud, that the galaxy is not marching toward glory or hope, but toward collapse. And the Hrud? They are already there, waiting. To understand the Hrud is to reckon not only with a biology twisted beyond the point of natural comprehension, but with the way their very presence unravels the basic assumptions of existence. Their flesh, if it can still be called that, appears in perpetual flux, half decayed and half phased, wrapped in tattered robes that might once have been clothing or skin or memory. They move as though disconnected from gravity, as if every step is half remembered by the world beneath them. But it is their relationship with time that makes them more than merely grotesque. It makes them impossible. Wherever the Hrud gather, time itself buckles. Clocks slow or speed without cause, voices echo seconds after they've stopped speaking, and entire corridors age a century in an hour. Metal rusts mid-polish, flesh withers mid-battle. Infants become corpses in their cradles. Elders revert to nothingness, as if their lives were stories told in reverse. It is not merely the perception of time that changes around the Hrud, but time's actual flow. They emanate localized entropy fields so profound that the laws of physics become nothing more than suggestions. It is not an aura. It is a contagion. It infects reality. Many suspect that this distortion is not accidental, that the Hrud, rather than being victims of temporal collapse, have become its agents. Their bodies host impossible biology, fluid exoskeletal structures that regenerate in non-linear ways, organs that seem to phase in and out of existence, and nervous systems that might not be bound to chronological cause and effect. Autopsies, when attempted, often yield contradictory results. One body examined under controlled stasis showed 6 different internal configurations in 6 separate observations, as if its internal makeup was not fixed, but shifting across timelines like a kaleidoscope spinning through causality. Some of their kind, it is whispered, do not walk in sync with the present at all. They flicker through frames of time, arriving half a second before they are seen, or lingering for hours after they are gone. It is unclear if this is an ability or a symptom. Perhaps even they no longer know. Perhaps they never did. Their very consciousness may exist outside of the linear stream we call thought, perceiving the past, present, and future as a tangled skein of instinct and memory. This may explain their eerie movements, their seeming precognition in battle, or their complete disregard for conventional survival strategies. For those who encounter them, this is more than unsettling. It is catastrophic. Whole regiments have disintegrated in temporal collapse zones after a Hrud infestation. Entire ships have vanished mid-transit, only to reappear as ancient wrecks filled with desiccated corpses and unreadable vox logs. On more than one occasion, the Adeptus Mechanicus has classified entire sectors as chronologically unstable. Following mass Hrud sightings, they know what it means. The collapse is not just spatial or biological, it is temporal. The Hrud do not invade, they rot reality from within. And yet there remains a thread of pity, even awe, in the hearts of those who study them deeply. For if they are creatures of entropy, then they are not merely destroyers, they are sufferers. Victims of a galaxy that broke something essential within them. Their every movement is pain extended across centuries, their every breath a collapse echoing backward. They are dying, not all at once but endlessly. And in their suffering they teach a lesson the Imperium refuses to learn. That time is not a ladder to climb, but a pit to fall into. And the Hrud are already at the bottom, clawing toward a surface that may no longer exist. Across the Imperium, there exists a pattern too subtle for the average citizen to perceive. But in the libraries of the Inquisition and the memory cogitators of the Mechanicus, it is a whisper too persistent to ignore. It begins with light, flickering lumen strips, stuttering auspex arrays, vox delays that cannot be traced to malfunction. Then come the sightings, hooded silhouettes in maintenance tunnels, unidentifiable vermin swarms migrating away from lower levels, servitors malfunctioning en masse. These signs are always followed by silence, rot, and collapse. Entire hab spires crumble under their own weight. Food stores spoil overnight. The air thickens with mold. And through it all, no one remembers the moment it started. Because the Hrud do not invade. They exodus. Unlike other Xenos who hunger for conquest, glory, or resources, the Hrud flee. Always. From where or to what, no one can say. But they migrate like disease, not an offensive maneuver, but a survival reflex. They are a species in eternal retreat, one so devastating in its passing that its very journey reshapes the worlds it touches. They appear in clusters, nomadic infestations that settle in forgotten corners of void ships, subhive levels, or asteroid tunnels. And once established, the rot begins. They do not build monuments or proclaim territories. They hollow out spaces with their presence, make them uninhabitable, not by intent, but by nature. They feed on warmth, on light, on structure, on time itself. Entire planetary civilizations have been lost not through war, but through abandonment following Hrud migrations. A planet that once bustled with 1 billion souls becomes a haunted ruin, too chronologically unstable for servitors to function, too rotten for crops to grow. The atmosphere churns with data static. Buildings collapse in slow motion, taking centuries to fall in some places, collapsing in an instant in others. The administratum often erases these losses from public records, labeling them Class D planetary anomalies or catastrophic chrono-environmental failures. But the Inquisition knows. The Hrud came, and time died. The psychological impact on survivors is almost worse than the material loss. Those who escape describe long-dead family members appearing in doorways, then vanishing. Diaries fill themselves with memories the author never wrote. Children born in Hrud-infested zones sometimes speak fluently of events that occurred before their parents were born. In these zones, memory cannot be trusted. History eats itself. It is a form of trauma that rewrites not only the mind, but the past. Many who live near such exoduses eventually take their own lives, not in despair, but in confusion. Because if one cannot remember why one hurts, the pain becomes infinite. And yet, for all this devastation, the Hrud seem unaware of their impact. There is no malice, no direction, no ambition. They do not raise cities or desecrate temples. They simply settle, exist, and move on. Some theories propose that they are drawn to entropy, that they migrate not to escape something, but to follow the scent of decay, like carrion birds in slow motion. Others believe the Hrud do not see time as linear, and thus do not understand the damage they cause. That, to them, the withering of a hive world is no different from its construction. Both are part of the same cycle, one seen through a lens far removed from human comprehension. Their exodus, then, is not a march through space, but through perception itself. They bring with them not war, but entropy. They are the shadow at the edge of awareness, the slow fraying of certainty. The feeling that something was forgotten, not recently, but before it was ever known. And once they have passed, the only thing left is ruin, and the question that no survivor can answer: did this ever happen at all? To look upon Hrud technology is to question whether it was ever designed in the first place. The tools and devices scavenged or observed from Hrud clusters defy logic, not just in function, but in aesthetic, in principle. They are not machines in the human sense. They are more like tumors of space-time, grown rather than built, each one a warped echo of a possibility that should never have been realized. Tech priests have described them as paracausal mechanisms, tools that should not work, that break causality by operating. One such item, once recovered and sealed within a stasis vault, emitted a consistent gravity well that pulled things not toward it, but into earlier versions of themselves. A servitor, dragged across the threshold, de-aged until its limbs reverted to unshaped plasteel rods. What the Hrud wield is not technology in the conventional sense. It is temporal manipulation masquerading as machinery. They do not need guns in the way the Imperium understands them. They project entropy fields, warp phase pulses, and time fracture waves. A single Hrud can render an armored squad useless by accelerating their armor into rust, their weapons into dust. Worse, their more sophisticated constructs, if one dares to call them that, seem to create pockets of localized reality where time flows differently. Observers report enemies appearing to slow to a crawl, or speed into blurs, or disappear altogether. A tank may fire, only for its shell to remain hovering in the air, locked in some forgotten second. Tessarak tech, as the Inquisition labels it, forms the core of their manipulation. It is not clear if the Hrud invented this or simply channel it through warp-inflected instinct. These devices often take the form of twisted nodules of metal and bone, studded with what may be anti-time crystals or decayed warpstone. They hum not with power, but with memory, a resonance that triggers migraines, déjà vu, or full-blown hallucinations in those nearby. Skitare who have attempted to interface with these objects often die screaming or fall into catatonia, mumbling fragments of languages not spoken for millennia. There is a belief among certain heretic circles that the Hrud do not invent, but rather retrieve, plucking technologies from futures that may never come to pass. In this view, they are not engineers, but thieves of possibility. Their machines are echoes of broken timelines, fragments salvaged from doomed outcomes. This would explain their apparent inconsistency, how the same device can behave differently from one encounter to another. If time is the forge in which Hrud tech is shaped, then each item is unique, a singular trauma made into tool. Hrud concealment fields are among the most disorienting examples. Not merely visual cloaks, these devices erase the idea of the Hrud from local reality. Combat footage shows entire squads walking past them without reacting, only realizing too late they were surrounded. In more extreme cases, Hrud-infested zones show security logs missing entire hours of footage. Not erased, but never recorded, as if time itself forgot. Some Hrud carry what can only be described as entropy projectors, tools that pulse with a visual ripple, causing walls to crumble and air to curdle. Others wield time-phase claws that slice not flesh but duration, carving away seconds of life, severing moments from the flow of battle. The terrifying reality is that Hrud technology may not be separate from their biology. It is not clear where the Hrud ends and the device begins. Some items seem grafted into their bodies, or perhaps grown from them. Others hover near them, unattached yet obedient, as if connected by unseen chronological tendrils. The boundary between tool and user, self and effect, seems to blur. It is as if the Hrud themselves are instruments of an unknowable entropy, tools through which the galaxy forgets what it once was, and is reminded of how fragile the present really is. Among the Hrud, there are some whose presence defies not only the senses but the soul. These are not warriors in the way the Imperium understands the term, not sorcerers, not witches, not even seers. They are distortions given form. Warp-touched, time-withered, drenched in the entropy that defines their race, these Hrud psychers are less individuals than they are localized collapses of possibility. In their presence, even the warp recoils. They do not summon flame or lightning. They undo. They unravel. They forget the world around them, and the world obliges. To be near a Hrud psyker is to feel your own thoughts disassemble, not torn away but subtly smothered. You forget your name, then the purpose of your mission. You forget your weapon's name, your regiment, your rank. You forget you exist. Not in a panicked way, but in a quiet, defeated one, as though you had never mattered. And in this absence, the Hrud psyker moves like a dying god. Reports speak of these beings collapsing entire strike teams by their mere proximity. Vox recordings from such events are riddled with auditory decay. Voices stutter, stretch, then fall silent entirely. Even data spirit records cannot hold their form. The tech itself forgets. What these psychers do is not simple psychic force. It is something more primal, more corrupted. It is entropy projected through will. Their powers might appear as localized temporal vortexes, where enemies age to dust or regress to primal sludge. Sometimes they phase through reality entirely, appearing in multiple locations in the same instant, or all at once in one moment, only to never have been there at all. To attempt counter-psyker tactics against them is suicide. The black ships refuse to collect them. The Sisters of Silence, when confronted with such a task, do not speak of it afterward. Even other Hruds seem wary of these entities. In what few observances have been made, these psychers are given wide berth within Hrud enclaves, surrounded not by attendants, but by space. They are rarely seen twice. Some theorize they are not long for this dimension, that they burn through their own existence simply by being. Others suggest they are not individuals at all, but convergence points, living events that happen only once. One disturbing hypothesis from Ordo Xenos records suggests that these psychers are what remains of Hrud who have lived too long, being so saturated with collapsed timelines and dead moments that they become fulcrums of decay. These psychers also appear to act not with malice, but inevitability. There is no screaming rage, no chanting of dark litanies. They simply emerge when the fabric of time thins enough to let them through. They drift across battlefields as though already dead, their passage marked by silence and the slow crumpling of matter. Bolter shells fall apart in midair. Plasma discharges blink out before firing. Inquisitors report that the very probability of events collapses near them. Dice always land as ones, guns always jam, hearts always stop. It is not curse, it is law. The law of entropy made will. One tale, dismissed as apocryphal by the administratum, tells of a hive world whose upper spires collapsed into dust while the underhive simultaneously grew back into bedrock. The only clue to what caused it was a single, flickering auspex image of a cloaked figure hovering above the ruins, its eyes twin implosions of lightless fire. The report was sealed. The image was scrubbed. But the memory lingers in those who cannot forget what they never saw. In the Hrud psyche, we see not the weaponization of the warp, but its decomposition. A psyche so drowned in entropy that it no longer needs to do anything. Its mere existence is a failing state. A rejection of the notion that time must flow forward, that cause must precede effect, that memory must follow event. These beings are not evil. They are the consequence of a universe breaking apart at the seams, and their power is not ambition. It is grief. When the Imperium records encounters with the Hrud, it does so not in military dispatches or post-battle debriefs, but in classified anomalies and heavily redacted field notes. These are not wars in the traditional sense. They are infestations, implosions of normality. Within the depths of the Administratum and the sealed vaults of the Inquisition, thousands of incidents are catalogued under titles like entropy events, temporal aberrations, or simply non-standard decay phenomena. Each one marks a brush with the Hrud, a race that makes a mockery of clear confrontation. One of the earliest recorded encounters, often referenced in whispers among the Ordo Xenos, occurred on the agri-world of Hesperax Theta. Within 2 standard weeks, vast swathes of farmland withered, the soil turned to dust, and the population began reporting shared hallucinations of shadowed figures whispering backwards prayers. Autopsies revealed advanced aging across multiple generations, sometimes within the same body. Hrud were never directly engaged, only their remnants were found, curled in shadowed burrows that seemed to collapse upon observation. The world was quarantined and eventually sterilized, but not before entire units of Mechanicus Magi committed data sanctification rituals out of sheer panic. More infamous still is the Necromundan Sub-Spire event, where a lower level of Hive Tarsus vanished over a series of days. Entire hab blocks fell silent, then unmoored from chronology altogether. Some reappeared decades later in the deep crust of neighboring planets, their inhabitants twisted or regressed into pre-human forms. No weaponry could explain it. The Inquisition's reports, heavily censored, speak only of anomalous migration phenomena consistent with Hrud presence. The Lord Inquisitor who authorized the exterminatus died screaming mid-liturgy, surrounded by blackened servo skulls that refused to record his last words. Frontline encounters are rarer but no less terrifying. The Astra Militarum does not train for battles against time. On Kashri Tertius, entire battalions reported seeing their own corpses weeks before death. Sergeant Dresnik of the 401st Valhallans reportedly shot a Hrud point blank, only to watch the shot split into rust dust midair, his lasgun fuse retroactively melt, and his hands age into brittle twigs. He died shrieking that he'd seen the end, and it weeps. Vox recordings capture none of this, just static and silence. The Adeptus Mechanicus fares no better. They have long studied the Hrud with a mixture of revulsion and obsessive curiosity. Data recovered from derelict explorator vessels often includes overlapping data screams, evidence of moments replayed or refracted through time. Engine seers exposed to Hrud zones suffer from chronofugue, a breakdown in linear cognition. Some emerge fluent in dialects not recorded for millennia. Others simply vanish from logs, their presence erased not by censorship but by the warp itself. Tech adepts speak of Hrud ghost machines, devices left behind that disintegrate under scrutiny or loop endlessly through the same 3-second, a servo arm rising, pausing, retracting, rising. Among the Astartes, few chapters have claimed confirmed Hrud kills, and fewer still speak of it. The Dark Angels have multiple sealed tomes referencing the scourging of the unmade depths, possibly an ancient Hrud nest purged beneath a forgotten world. The Blood Ravens, ever drawn to arcane lore, have suffered severe losses in what are rumored to be time displacement engagements. Some of their brothers reappearing centuries later, hollow-eyed and silent, armor scabbed with rust in shapes that resemble runes. The pattern remains the same. Silence, decay, confusion, collapse. No great speeches, no climactic battles, just ruin in the shape of movement. The Hrud do not announce themselves. They do not demand surrender. They do not claim victory. They move through the galaxy like time zone regret, unseen, unchallenged, and absolutely deadly. The Imperium pretends to forget because remembering costs too much. But in the records that refuse to burn, the shape of the truth remains. The Hrud are not enemies. They are inevitabilities. Among the Eldar, there are names too dangerous to speak aloud, not for fear of summoning, but for fear of remembrance. The Hrud are one such name. In the cryptic whispers of the bone singers and the agonized visions of the farseers, they are not merely Xenos. They are myth. They are the ache at the end of time. The Eldar, more than any race, understand the nuances of collapse. They know what it is to fall, to drown in the echo of one's own hubris. And so, when they speak of the Hrud, it is not with anger or contempt, it is with dread. Because to the Eldar, the Hrud are a mirror held too long to a dying god. There are fragments of prophecy scattered across the craft worlds, half destroyed in psychic fire or preserved only in the memories of dying seers. In these, the Hrud are not portrayed as a race but as a function. Entropy given sentience, decay made ambulatory. They are described as the unravelers, the sigh before silence, and most disturbingly, the final remembrance. According to the cryptic verses of the Dirges of Alace, the Hrud are not bound by the materium alone. They are echoes of a final future, stepping backward into the present, dissolving the reality that dared to outlive them. Some craft worlds believe the Hrud are ancient tools of the old ones, temporal scavengers once meant to regulate the flow of history across the stars, turned cancerous by the war in heaven. Others say they were cursed by Isha herself, their forms broken and bent for the sin of knowing too much. And then there are those, deep within the myth-choked paths of Ulthwé, who claim the Hrud are fragments of Yniad's mourning, pieces of the death god's future sorrow already leaking into the now. If the Eldar are fated to die, then perhaps the Hrud are already mourning them, not as outsiders, but as what they might become. There is a tale, told only in song, of the fallen chorus, an ancient Eldar enclave that tried to parley with the Hrud during the Age of Strife. The story claims they reached into the time-sick zones where the Hrud migrated, seeking peace or perhaps kinship. What returned were empty minds housed in functional bodies. They spoke no words. Their memories were blank. The song ends with a single, sustained note that never resolves, a musical representation of a thought that cannot conclude. To this day, some say the echo of that note can be heard in certain webway shrines, where the fabric of time runs thin. The Harlequins, those guardians of forbidden truth, are said to perform a rare dance known as the Mask of the Cracked Hour. Only performed on the darkest of days, it depicts a world where time decays, where laughter turns into weeping mid-chord, and dancers age into dust between steps. In its final act, a single masked figure, robed in tattered void hues, sweeps across the stage, not attacking but being noticed. And everything stops. The implication is clear. The Hrud are not vanquished by strength. They are survived only by being unseen. For the Eldar, memory is sacred. Every moment matters, every echo of the past a thread in the web of fate. The Hrud defy that. They do not just erase lives, they erase context, causality, purpose. To forget one's sorrow is mercy. To forget one's joy is tragedy. But to forget that anything ever mattered? That is annihilation beyond death. This is what the Eldar fear. Not the Hrud's weapons, not their passage, but their erasure. Because to be erased by the Hrud is to be unremembered by the universe itself. A death that even the warp refuses to mourn. And so the Eldar whisper. They record nothing. They do not war against the Hrud. They avoid, they respect, they weep in silence when Hrud migrations brush too near a maiden world or a craft world's trailing edge. Because in the end, they suspect a terrible truth, that the Hrud are not foreign. They are the future. The galaxy's inevitable fate made ambulatory, the ending made flesh, and it is not coming. It is already here. There is a chilling theory whispered among rogue inquisitors and heretics alike, one so terrifying in its implications that it is rarely committed to data slate or cogitator. It is the idea that the Hrud are not a species in the conventional sense at all, that they are not individuals, not a culture, not even a civilization, but rather that they are living catastrophes. Sentient events, the conceptual embodiment of collapse, entropy, and the irreversible unraveling of ordered systems. That they are, in effect, weapons, not created, but emergent. The end result of history, compacted into ambulatory forms that cannot help but destroy causality wherever they go. This theory reframes everything. If the Hrud are living weapons, then they are not deployed. They are born, not in nests or broods, but in conditions. In the ruins of failed timelines, in zones where time is fractured so completely that space itself becomes exhausted, where nothing can happen anymore, only fail to happen. There, the Hrud emerge, not summoned, not built, just realized. Like a pressure bubble in reality that must burst, and the Hrud are the scalding truth released. Imagine a galaxy with so many interwoven failures, so many temporal scars, from warp travel, from Necron time fiddling, from demonic incursions, from lost technology, that some places cannot sustain chronology anymore. These black zones, these voids of logic and sequence, are breeding grounds for Hrud. They are not survivors, they are symptoms. Where the flow of history breaks, they come. As if the universe, unable to continue, dreams them into being as a final apology. A cough of decay before silence. In this view, every Hrud migration is not a tactical maneuver, but a spreading infection of unreality. They do not move with purpose because they are purpose lost. They wander like fever dreams, spreading conceptual failure. Battles fought against them become exercises in futility, not because the Hrud are overwhelming, but because nothing makes sense around them. A gun jams not because it malfunctions, but because the concept of firing decays. A strategy fails not from poor execution, but because cause no longer leads to effect. A commander gives an order, and his men, mid-hearing, forget what war is. The few Hrud that seem to exhibit personality or choice may only be mimicking these things, echoes of sapient form. They wear cloaks and hoods not for modesty, but because the humanoid shape is the easiest mask for a collapsing event to wear. Perhaps once, long ago, the Hrud were a people, a true species. But in time, with time, they became something else, something post-living, post-identity. The ghost of extinction, looping itself across the stars, searching not for conquest but for an end that sticks. This also explains the inconsistencies in their appearance. Why some seem insectile, others ghost-like. Why their tech shifts form. Why their psychers unmake reality just by existing. Because consistency itself is a casualty in their wake. Because they are not bound to the narrow constraints of biology or history. They are the end of those things. They are the moments after death when memory no longer applies, and they do not hate. They do not feel. They simply are. They are the entropy that follows every great work, the silence after every scream, the ash after every fire. To think of the Hrud this way is to surrender the hope of understanding them as anything like us. They are not aliens. They are aftermath, not just to be feared, but to be mourned. For in every cluster of Hrud, in every ruined hive they pass through, we do not see a threat. We see a preview of Terra, of Atramor, of every world that dreams it will outlast its own age. And the Hrud, shuffling forward without glory, without purpose, without memory, are the galaxy's quiet reminder. All things collapse, even time. Among the wildest and most disputed theories concerning the Hrud is the notion that they are not a naturally evolved species, but an artificial consequence, the byproduct of ancient manipulation, a failed experiment in temporal weaponization gone horribly, irreversibly right. There are two primary schools of thought surrounding this origin, that they were shaped by the Necrons in their arrogant meddling with time, or cursed by the Old Ones in a last, desperate act during the War in Heaven. Both explanations carry grim implications. Both paint the Hrud not as monsters, but as victims of a design too immense to understand. The Necron theory has gained traction in recent decades, particularly among radical elements of the Ordo Chronos and the Xenorite sects of the Adeptus Mechanicus. According to this view, during the War in Heaven, the Necrons, or more precisely the Necron Cryptex, attempted to harness time itself as a weapon. It is known they possess stasis fields, chrono-displacement arrays, and weapons that lock targets outside the stream of causality. What if, in one such experiment, they shattered a fragment of time so utterly that it bled into the material world? What if this breach did not kill, but twisted and prolonged its victims, folding them inside out across their own histories? Proponents of this theory believe the Hrud were once another race, possibly an intelligent species aligned with the Old Ones, captured, broken, and repurposed as test subjects. As the Necrons fine-tuned their grasp of the temporal spectrum, these early experiments fractured. Time no longer applied to the subjects linearly. They decayed before they were born. They died, then lived, then died again. Their pasts crumbled, their futures collapsed. The only thread that remained was entropy. They clung to it, not as a function of biology, but as identity. And from that shattering, the first Hrud emerged. walking blights on causality, shaped by a science that had no morality and a purpose now long forgotten. The other theory, no less disturbing, claims that the Hrud were the Old One's creation, an intentional countermeasure against the Necron's timeless technologies. In this narrative, the Old Ones did not attempt to stop the flow of time, but to break it. They fashioned the Hrud as entropy bombs, seeded across the galaxy in dormant form, meant to awaken only in response to certain temporal distortions. Their role was to destabilize reality in precisely the way Necron stasis technology required to function, to turn the Necron's own gift, immunity to aging, into a curse, by creating zones where time had no meaning at all. If this is true, then the Hrud were never meant to be a people. They were never meant to migrate, to reproduce, to endure. They were living decay, unbound tools of sabotage made from the bones of some forgotten race and set adrift in the galactic current. But like so many tools of war, they outlived their creators, and without a cause, they became cause itself. Without a war to end, they became the end of war. And now, without a master, they drift through time like broken equations. Errors that the universe cannot resolve, but cannot discard either. There is no consensus, there is only fear. The Necrons deny any knowledge. Though this means little, they deny many things, often even to themselves. The Eldar do not speak of the Hrud as creations, but they tremble as if they remember. And the Hrud? They say nothing. If they have a myth of their own beginning, it is buried in silence, rotted with memory, too decomposed to communicate. They carry no artifacts of heritage, no genetic memory, no cultural scaffolding. They are born not into history, but into absence. In either case, the implication is horrifying. Whether by Necron cruelty or Old One desperation, the Hrud are a legacy of hubris, a scar left by those who thought they could wield time as easily as they wielded weapons. And like any true scar, the Hrud do not go away. They deepen, they widen, they ache, and as the galaxy stumbles toward its own ending, it becomes increasingly clear. Whatever the Hrud were meant to stop or destroy is irrelevant. Because now, they are what remains. Imagine a culture that cannot rely on continuity. A species for whom yesterday might unright itself, for whom memory is less a function of the mind and more a gamble against entropy. This is the world of the Hrud, not as invaders, not as anomalies, but as thinkers, as mourners, as beings who must feel the erosion of meaning, not as philosophy, but as daily life. To consider what passes for Hrud culture is to peer into a civilization that exists in a constant state of forgetting, whose rituals may be efforts to hold together the very idea of selfhood across the endless decay of time. There are no known Hrud art forms in the traditional sense. Nothing endures long enough. A sculpture may collapse before its creator finishes it. A song, if they even remember it, is likely unrecognizable the next time it is performed. Language among the Hrud is said to be fluid, a vibrating cloud of psionic residue and muttering static. Not words in the way humans understand them, but emotive impressions, pulses of collective decay. Some theorists believe Hrud talk less to communicate information and more to remember how to communicate, lest they forget mid-thought what thought itself is. Still, within the fragments left behind, a few patterns emerge. The tattered robes they wear, often dismissed as camouflage or remnants of scavenged clothing, may in fact be mnemonic devices. Each layer a woven record of time that otherwise refuses to remain. Some inquisitors hypothesize that Hrud enclaves stitch their lives into fabric, not as decoration, but as anchors, physical attempts to solidify experiences before they are eroded. These robes are often laden with curious symbols, not repeated with the precision of language, but scattered like prayers half forgotten. They are not maps. They are warnings to themselves. Hrud structures, when found intact, are paradoxical. Built into the darkest recesses of derelict ships or sunless tunnels, their geometry is non-Euclidean. Their angles sickening to the human eye. Some scholars suspect they are not built for spatial convenience, but temporal reinforcement. A room may not be designed for shelter, but for memory stabilization. A corridor may be less a passage than a ritual, a path that forces movement through moments, like walking across the echo of a heartbeat. Their architecture does not challenge physics, it ignores it. And yet, beneath all this, there may still be belief. Some have speculated that the Hrud worship entropy not as a god, but as a condition. that their priests are not spiritual leaders but memory stewards, individuals whose job is not to interpret scripture, but to remember it long enough for another to hear. This would explain reports of certain Hrud stopping mid-battle to chant in low, wet tones, not curses, but mantras of self-location, a desperate tethering of their unraveling minds to the flickering present. In a world without consistent time, faith may not be a matter of salvation. It may be the only remaining structure. Even reproduction among the Hrud is debated. Are they born? Are they split off from larger entities, like budding decay? One theory claims Hrud do not breed in the usual sense, but shed, that when one collapses under its own entropic load, it splits into multiple younger fragments, each less coherent than the whole. This would make their population not a tree, but a rot, a spreading. Each generation less certain of its own identity, each one more dissolved in the timeless grief of existence. And through it all, one terrible consistency: sorrow. No matter their origin, no matter their physiology, every account that has attempted psychic communion with a Hrud has reported an overwhelming impression of loss. Not personal loss, total loss. The loss of certainty, of causality, of meaning. The Hrud do not mourn their dead. They mourn the idea that death means anything, that life was ever distinct. They live in the hollow where continuity used to be. In this, the Hrud are not only a cultural enigma. They are a mirror. They show us what happens when culture outlasts memory, when ritual becomes a fight not for truth, but for existence. And in their lonely drift across a galaxy that pretends to make sense, they stitch their forgetting into the folds of their rags, hoping, perhaps, that someone, someday, might remember what they no longer can. Across the gulfs of space, where even light begins to forget its path, there are stars that die not with a bang, but with a whisper. Systems where entropy blooms like fungus, where heat recedes and decay becomes sovereign. These are the places where the Hrud linger. Not by intention, not by design, but by resonance, because there is something in the end of stars that sings to them. Something that aligns with the slow, collapsing nature of their very being. If the galaxy has organs of decline, then the Hrud are its breath, exhaled in the final moments before silence. There have been reports, half disbelieved, always redacted, of Hrud observed near dying suns. Small clusters, wrapped in the tattered remnants of themselves, drifting close to red dwarfs in their final sputters or to black holes where time knots itself into oblivion. What are they doing there? No communication, no harvest, no battle, just presence, as if witnessing, as if attending a funeral not just for matter, but for meaning. The Imperium, in its arrogance, dismisses these sightings as coincidence. But there are those who believe that the Hrud are drawn to these stellar deaths, not to feed, not to conquer, but because they understand them, because they recognize the end when they see it. Inquisitorial logs from the Skyros system detail a haunting event, a binary star system where one star had collapsed prematurely. Minutes after the collapse, all temporal readings across nearby vessels began to malfunction. Chronometers reversed, servitors aged to rust. Astropathic messages repeated in reverse sequence. The fleet barely escaped. Later surveys found nothing, no debris, no readings, no trace. Just a single pick capture left behind, a silhouette in a collapsing corona, hunched and still, surrounded by the seething ash of a dying light. The symbol scrawled into the record? Hrud. This recurring link between the Hrud and cosmic entropy has led some radical Xeno scholars to suggest that the Hrud are not merely harbingers of death, but participants. That on some level, perhaps instinctual, perhaps ordained, they assist in the collapse. Not in a ritualistic sense, but as a catalyst. That their presence accelerates decline, not maliciously, but naturally. Like bacteria at the site of decay, they do not cause the wound, but ensure it rots clean. In this sense, the Hrud are not galactic vermin. They are custodians of the end. Their movement patterns, when mapped, align disturbingly well with stellar senescence data. Wherever a Hrud migration passes, not only do ecosystems collapse, stars dim, warp storms flare and vanish, and even blackstone deposits seem to degrade more rapidly. There is a growing belief in certain fringe circles that the Hrud may be shepherding the galaxy toward heat death. Not as a plan, but as an inevitability they merely obey. They are not engineers of the end. They are its caretakers. They do not destroy. They allow destruction to conclude. This would explain their utter lack of ambition. Why build empires if all empires must crumble? Why record history if history will forget itself? Why fight wars if victory is just another form of decay? The Hrud live with this truth not as philosophy, but as biology. Their bodies, their minds, their technology all echo the principles of decline. They do not resist the end. They carry it. And in the ruins of collapsed systems, in the echoes of vanished light, they remain. Not to haunt, but to acknowledge. To confirm the passage. If this is their purpose, if the Hrud are truly attuned to the entropy of stars, then they may represent the galaxy's final inheritors. Not in triumph, but in attrition. When the last throne shuts down, when the final Astartes breathes his last war cry, when the eye of terror finally blinks closed in exhaustion, the Hrud will remain, bent, tattered, silent, watching the last ember gutter out, not with joy or despair, but with the calm certainty of those who have seen it all decay before. And in their posture, hunched and inward, as if cradling something, we may read the only prayer the universe has left, that endings, at the very least, be witnessed. There are beings in this galaxy that fight for glory, for empire, for vengeance. There are gods that scream for blood, for change, for pain. There are species that rage against death, others that embrace it. But the Hrud do not rage. They do not scream. They do not fight or flee or conquer. They simply move, slowly, inevitably, like the closing of a book, like the final breath before the story ends. And the truth is this: we do not understand them. We cannot. Because the Hrud are not what we expect from an enemy. They are not opposition. They are not malice. They are not war. They are something else. They are what comes after. All our attempts to catalog, dissect, confront, or comprehend them end in failure, not because we lack data, but because the Hrud unmake the very framework we use to define understanding. They unspool narrative. They dissolve intent. They rot explanation. It is like trying to define silence by shouting louder, like trying to trap shadow with light. The more we look, the more they fray from our grasp. Not because they are elusive, but because we are too bound by the need for reason. The Hrud do not follow reason, they follow decay. This is why the Imperium burns their records, why the Mechanicus encrypts their findings, why the Inquisition classifies even the whispers. It is not out of control, but fear. Because deep down, even the most rigid servants of the Emperor sense that the Hrud are not aberrations, they are revelations. That they reveal a truth too vast, too corrosive to accept. That time itself is not a ladder, but a loop. That progress is not ascent, but repetition. That the end is not a cliff, but a sinkhole beneath everything. And the Hrud are not falling, they are waiting. They wait in the dark corners of derelict ships, in the shadowed ruins of forgotten hives, in the cracks of timelines we pretend are whole. They do not need attention, they do not demand revenge. They require only that time continue and in continuing unravel. For every warp jump made, for every relic activated, for every victory screamed from cathedral spires, there is a toll. And the Hrud are that toll made flesh, the final invoice of a reality we have overdrawn. So no, we do not understand them. Not really. And that is right, that is as it must be. Because if we ever did understand them, fully, completely, it would mean we had already begun to forget what came before. It would mean we had joined them, that we too had surrendered continuity, that we too had given up on memory and meaning, that we had become echoes. And so the galaxy turns, empires fall, stars die, wars rage. And in the wake of all this, bent-backed figures shuffle quietly across the void, robed in the tatters of what was, bearing no hatred, no ambition, only presence. The Hrud are not coming. They have always been here, in every collapse, in every forgotten name, in every timeline that loops back in error. This is why time dies in their wake, because time, like truth, like memory, like us, was never meant to last forever. If you've made it this far, fellow traveler, thank you for joining this journey into the darkest recesses of Warhammer 40k. If you hunger for more mysteries, more forbidden knowledge, more beautifully broken lore, consider subscribing to the channel. The galaxy is vast, and the horrors have only just begun.